Greetings Internet, my name is Old Rod and this is a video about Pokemon cards. We've been looking at Pojo Magazine and their power rating system. So far on this ratings retrospective, we've managed to cover all of the base set cards, which means we're moving on to the jungle. We'll be looking at every single card from the Jungle expansion, seeing what rating Pojo gave these cards back in 1999, and then re-rating them to what they'd be scored in today's base fossil metagame. 3 or above, competitively playable, anything below that, not so much. Grab yourself a great big handful of safari balls, and let's head to the jungle. Kicking things off with Clefable. Clefable is a stage 1 colourless Pokemon with 70 HP and a resistance to Psychic. Pojo gave Clefable a 4 out of 5 with the strategy: the jungle evolution of Clefairy has all the good stuff of Clefairy, the metronome attack mainly, with higher HP and lower requirements for the metronome. For 1 colourless energy, Metronome lets you choose one of the defending Pokemon's attacks and use it. Now, the text on the card says that Metronome doesn't copy the attack's energy costs, which is correct, nor does it copy any other requirements that need to be performed in order to use the attack, such as discarding energy cards, which is incorrect. This is a mistranslation. You do still have to do those things, such as you want to use Flamethrower. Sure, you only need a single colourless energy to copy the attack, but you still have to discard a fire energy from Clefable to use it. All clear now? Yeah, who knows. And then for 2 colourless energy, Minimize reduces all damage done to Clefable during your opponent's next turn by 20. So, let's talk about Metronome. On the surface, Metronome looks incredible. For only a single energy of whatever type you want, you can copy your opponent's best attacks. As you can imagine, this makes Clefable amazing against certain cards. Just for a single energy, it can Oko Zapdos with Thunderbolt, Oko Moltres with a Lucky Dive Bomb, 2-shot Venusaur with Solar Beam, 2-shot Arcanine with Takedown, or Flamethrower if you have the fire energy, 2-shot Mewtwo with Psyburn whilst resisting it, 2-shot Hitmonchan with Special Punch, 2-shot Electabuzz with a Lucky Thunder Punch, 2-shot Wigglytuff with Do the Wave, 2-shot Articuno with the Freeze-Dry Blizzard combo. But then there are the cards Clefable doesn't do so well against. Despite resisting Psychic, the Mr. Mime matchup ends in a stalemate, since Meditate stops doing damage once Mr. Mime has more than 2 damage counters on it. Machop is a terrible matchup for Clefable. Machop's low kick hits Clefable for weakness, meaning that a Machop will KO Clefable in 2 turns, whereas Clefable needs 3 turns to take out Machop, unless you've got a plus power. Against Blastoise, it does feel nice to copy Hydro Pump for only 1 energy, but unless you're also running Water Energy to power Hydro Pump up, you're only doing 40 damage, which ends up as a 3-hit KO on Blastoise. Whereas Blastoise can likely Oko a Clefable if it's got a Hydro Pump that's fully powered up and plus power. Chansey is a bit of a non-starter, unless it's genuinely worth kamikazing your Clefable to KO an already damaged Chansey. Dodrio is a very tricky matchup, as the Rage Mirror matches always tend to be. But what a clever Dodrio player will do is simply put a Doduo in front of Clefable. All Clefable can do here is copy Fury Attack, which A, isn't a very good attack to be copying, and B, only serves to put damage counters onto Doduo without knocking it out, and then allowing your opponent to evolve into Dodrio and hit a big damage Rage. Against an opposing Clefable or Ditto, yeah, nothing happens. But the big question is Lickitung, the card that dominates the base fossil meta. How does Clefable fare here? Well, it depends. There's no point getting into a tongue wrap war since Lickitung has more HP than Clefable. Besides, even if you do start chipping away at its HP, your opponent will likely scoop Lickitung up before you can KO it. The best strategy is to try and confuse Lickitung with Supersonic. If you flip heads, then you're forcing your opponent to burn an early scoop up. And if they don't scoop up, you can retreat into another attacker and start swinging away with the comforting knowledge that a confused Lickitung will have to flip 2 heads to paralyse you. So, Clefable may not be the ideal counter to Lickitung, but it can be effective with a lucky coin flip. What makes Clefable particularly appealing against Lickitung and many other decks is its ability to withstand energy removals. Metronome only needs one energy, so you're almost always going to be able to use it every turn, unlike a Wigglytuff that can get stopped dead in its tracks after being super energy removaled. The single energy requirement allows Clefable to synergise really well with your own super energy removals, as well as with Pokemon Center. Both of these cards will help Clefable to outlast the other 70 HP monsters that you're slugging it out with. But, as mentioned, copying your opponent's attacks won't always be a good tactic, so you'll need some alternative attackers up your sleeve. So, who pairs well with Clefable? Firstly, Dodrio. You want to get 2 Dodrio benched so that Clefable can easily retreat for free when it's confronted with a Pokemon that it just has a really bad matchup against. Magmar. Now, one of the first decks I ever made on TCG1 was a Clefable Magmar deck, as both can attack for 1 energy, so again, you're less vulnerable to super energy removals, they synergise well with your own super energy removals and with Pokemon Center. This deck does really well against Haymaker builds and Wigglytuff decks, but it struggles to take prizes against Lickitung and is rather weak to Rain Dance. Hitmonchan. What Hitmonchan offers that Magmar doesn't is a way to deal with Lickitung. The downside here is that Hitmonchan is useless against all those fighting resistant Pokemon, your Scythers, your Ghastlies, your Dodrios. Clefable has quite a good matchup against Scyther, a tricky one against Dodrio, and despite resisting Ghastly, it will take you several turns to actually knock it out since all you're doing is copying Lick. Scyther. Now, Scyther, I think, works great with Clefable, since you can run all grass energies, allowing you to put immense pressure on your opponent with Swords Dance. Plus, Clefable doesn't need double colourless energies, so you can dedicate all of those to slashing with Cypher. Since you're running grass, I also include a cheeky coughing in this deck. That's to put status conditions on Lickitung, forcing your opponent to burn a scoop up. Another grass alternative in this deck is Muck, since this will help Clefable against Mr. Mime, Blastoise, but I prefer coughing in this build since, well, coughing is also good against Mr. Mime and sometimes against Blastoise. But there's also the All-Stars deck. The deck that I think Clefable probably works best in is pairing it with a sort of All-Stars lineup of Electabuzz, Hitmonchan, Machop, Ponyta, all these cards that give you a lot of type coverage. Electabuzz and the fighting types deal with Dodrios and Lickitungs, and Ponyta can two-shot Scythers. Now, the question of whether Clefable is better than Wigglytuff in these all-star type coverage builds is a tricky one. Clefable is far less energy intensive, but also far more situational. Ultimately, Wigglytuff will pose a bigger threat to the best decks in the format, i.e. Lickitung, so there's your answer really. But I genuinely believe Clefable is a top card. Aside from its handful of shonky matchups, Clefable's biggest setback is Clefairy. Clefairy is the definition of liability, and in a competitive setting poses a real risk of losing the game on turn 1. If you start with a lone Clefairy and your opponent has Hitmonchan, one jab is all it takes to send this fighting weak fairy back to Mount Moon. And yeah, don't expect that terrible Sing attack to save you. Pojo gave Clefable a 4 out of 5. Now, I know there are plenty of people out there that don't rate Clefable. I, on the other hand, love this card. It can tear through the 70 HP Haymaker gang and easily withstand energy removals. Against Lickitung, its best bet is to try and confuse it, but a successful heads and you're forcing your opponent to scoop. Clefable may not be as devastating as its cuddly companion Wigglytuff, and it is seriously hampered by Clefairy's rubbishness. Am I going to keep this card's rating at 4? I feel like it's a very biased thing to do, but 3.5 does feel a bit low. I guess I could give it a 3.75. So, it was this point in recording that I decided the only way I could figure out what to rate Clefable was to play a bunch of matches with it. Now, this first match here is classic Clefable. It absolutely destroys this Mewtwo, but then is left to slowly pound away at Dratini. I managed to win, but that is sort of the pros and cons of Clefable summed up in a nutshell. And then there's this match here where this Machop, as I mentioned earlier, absolutely destroys. I think about 2 of my Clefables get knocked out by it. And here is a still image of probably what is the greatest Clefairy-Clefable combo ever, where the two of them managed to take out a pair of Moltres by metronoming dive bombs. Incredible scenes. So yeah, to conclude, I have to fight against my own instincts. I think Clefable can be amazing, but it is very situational. Sometimes it just isn't useful. So yeah, I'm very begrudgingly going to give Clefable a 3.5, but it is top of the 3.5 tier for me. Absolutely, it is knocking on the 4 door. But yeah, if I'm giving cards like Blastoise and Electabuzz 4, I don't know if I can put Clefable with them. So I'm going to officially give Clefable a 3.75. There, I've cheated. Sorry. Right, let's move on. Next up is a Pokemon whose rating it will be much simpler to come to a conclusion on. It's Electrode. Yep, this is the first of many lightning duplicates that you'll see throughout Jungle and Fossil. Why so? Well, there just aren't that many lightning-type Pokemon. So yeah, Wizards just made lots of alternate versions of them. Fair enough, I guess. Anyway, Electrode is a Stage 1 lightning-type Pokemon with 90 HP. Pojo gave Electrode a 2 out of 5 with the strat: players new to the Jungle set will find that this Electrode doesn't measure up to the one found in base set. For 2 colourless energy, Tackle does 20 damage, and for 3 lightning energy, Chain Lightning does 20 damage. Then, as long as the defending Pokemon isn't colourless, it also does 10 damage to all of your opponent's benched Pokemon that are the same type as the defending Pokemon. Okay, when deciding if Jungle Electrode is good, we have to put it into context. First, you have to evolve it from Voltorb. Like Clefairy, Voltorb has 40 HP and a fighting weakness. Turn 1 jab, straight to the discard pile. Second, there already exists an Electrode. Base set Electrode has the amazing Buzz-Up Pokemon power that allows you to KO Electrode, attach it to one of your Pokemon, and it counts as 2 energy of whatever type you like. Buzz-Up Electrode is the foundation of the modern Arcanine decks, which, although fragile, can steamroll their way to victory in a few turns. Buzz-Up Electrode can also be used on anything, from Zapdos to Executor to, I don't know, Rhydon. In short, it's a powerful, versatile card which you can build a variety of scary decks around. So, what exactly is Jungle Electrode bringing to the table? Tackle does 20 damage for 2 energy. Okay, fine. I mean, no one's risking a lone Voltorb start just so they can evolve up and use Tackle. Well, Chain Lightning is clearly Electrode's premier attack. But the problem with this attack comes with its first few words. Unless the defending Pokemon is colourless. That's right, if you're facing a colourless Pokemon, Chain Lightning's bench damage doesn't happen. So you end up doing a mere 20 damage for 3 lightning energy. That's rubbish. And in case you're unfamiliar with the base fossil meta, colourless Pokemon are everywhere. Lickitung, Wigglytuff, even the lightning weak Dodrio all prevent Chain Lightning's bench damage. So yeah, when all the format's best Pokemon completely negate this attack, it's not a good start for Electrode. Besides, the bench damage would only hit Pokemon of the same type as the defender, which isn't a particularly strong effect in modern base fossil, since most of the top decks run Pokemon of a variety of different types. Lickitung Stool, Haymaker, Alakazam, modern decks tend to be diverse in typing. Even Venusaur is chock full of bulky, colourless attackers. The only modern deck that Chain Lightning would work well against is Rain Dance, since it's the only modern deck where every Pokemon is the same type. Water. On top of this, you could hit Blastoise and Lapras for weakness, which is a nice bonus. But there are just better Rain Dance counters out there. Mr. Mime is the classic, since Invisible Wall prevents damage from Blastoise and Articuno. Or, if you want to run a lightning-themed deck, Electabuzz is much easier to power up than Electrode, does more damage, and doesn't require you having to play Voltorb. Pojo gave Jungle Electrode a 2 out of 5. Sure, its 90 HP is decent, and you can splash it into any deck if you just want to use its colourless attack, but Promo Electabuzz is your go-to colourless lightning attacker, and base set Electrode is your go-to Electrode. Jungle Electrode, with its expensive and only very situationally useful Chain Lightning attack, just ain't worth it. I'm sticking with Pojo's score, 2 out of 5. Next up is Flareon. Flareon is a Stage 1 Fire-type Pokemon with 70 HP. Pojo gave Flareon a 3.5 out of 5 with the strat, love that flamethrower. There's only one retreat cost, and really solid if you happen to have a Dodrio on the bench. For 2 colourless energy, Quick Attack does 10 damage, flip a coin, if heads it does 30 damage. And for 2 fire and 2 colourless energy, Flamethrower does 60 damage, but you have to discard a fire energy. So, how does Flareon stack up against other good fire-type attackers? Well, let's look at Flareon's attacks. Quick Attack is a colourless attack similar to Charmeleon's Slash, allowing it to be splashed into any colour deck, for the likely reason of threatening Scythers. Slash does take a turn longer to power up than Quick Attack, but slap on a plus power, and Slash gives you a guaranteed OHKO against Scyther. Quick Attack would need a plus power and a heads coin flip to achieve the same thing. In terms of Flamethrower, Flareon's is more powerful than Charmeleon's. 60 damage is really good, and a plus power will be enough to OHKO the big Haymaker basics. The problem is trying to power this attack up in the energy removal heavy base fossil format. To be fair, Charmeleon does suffer the same problem, but at least in the meantime you can be slashing away. With Flareon you're stuck using the far less consistent Quick Attack. And Flareon's Quick Attack does end up being a less good version of another Stage 1 Fire type, Rapidash's Stomp. Stomp does a guaranteed 20, 30 on that heads coin flip. And both Charmeleon and Rapidash have much better pre-evolved forms than Flareon does. The other Stage 1 Fire type card that sees a lot of competitive play, well, some competitive play, is Arcanine. It's tough to compare Arcanine and Flareon because their playstyles are so vastly different. Arcanine decks don't even play fire energy, instead relying on turn 1 Headache, then a turn 2 Buzzap DCE last combo to have Arcanine swinging for 80 damage. You could pull off this same setup with Flareon, but why would you? You'd only be doing 60 damage instead of 80, and more importantly, Flamethrower requires you to discard fire energy, so you'd end up immediately discarding your Buzzap Electrode. Not ideal. The other top fire card in the format is Fossil Magmar. Now, Fossil Magmar is a basic Pokemon that shares Flareon's 70 HP and small retreat cost. It also has 2 easy to power up attacks that can really annoy your opponent. Smokescreen is far better than Quick Attack, and Smog, although not as powerful as Flamethrower, is an attack you'll actually be able to use before getting energy removaled. Basically, if you're running a fire energy deck, it makes far more sense to run Magmar over Flareon. Or, if you're not running a fire energy deck but want to counter a Scyther, you'd run Charmeleon or maybe Rapidash. And this is the fundamental flaw with all of the evolutions. As individual cards, they tend to be outclassed by other options. And as a deck archetype, well, the idea of the Evolutions deck is to give you coverage against 3 different weaknesses. You run Eevee and its 3 evolutions, and depending on what you're up against, you can evolve Eevee into the best option to counter that. If your first thought is, running 3 different energy types? That doesn't sound great. Then yes, you'd be right. But this is why all of the Evolution decks have the same colourless Quick Attack, allowing you to do something whilst you search for the requisite energies. This is, of course, all very frustrating in practice. Finding the right evolution, finding the right energy, it's all a real faff. Plus, in a deck running 3 different energy types, makes the fact that you have to discard fire energy to use Flamethrower extra annoying. And trying to win a game with just Quick Attack isn't going to get you very far. Thing is, there are a variety of potpourri style decks out there, and they all function far smoother than the evolutions. If you really want to hit for fire, lightning and water weaknesses, you can run a combination of 3 basics with only 2 energy types, like Magmar, Promo Electabuzz and Staryu, or Ponyta, Electabuzz and Lapras. Neither of these decks sound amazing, but they're certainly much better than the muddled mess of wrong evolutions and wrong energy types that evolution decks end up being. Pojo gave Flareon 3.5 out of 5. As a standalone fire attacker, Flareon's flamethrower just requires too much energy, and its quick attack is just a bit underwhelming for a stage 1. And then, as part of the Evolutions deck, yeah, good luck making that deck work in Base Fossil. In later formats, the gimmick of multiple evolutions actually is playable, and can be super fun switching between the different evolutions. But in Base Fossil, you're better off using a kaleidoscopic army of basic Pokemon, which also allows you more deck space for good trainer cards, if you're really looking to target multiple weaknesses. The Evolutions deck just isn't playable. Leave your Firestone at home, folks, because I'm afraid I'm giving Flareon a 2.5. But look who we have next! It's Jolteon! Jolteon is a Stage 1 Lightning-type Pokemon with 70 HP. Pojo also gave Jolteon a 3.5, with the strat, Jolteon does really well in a Lightning deck. So well, in fact, that you'll undoubtedly want multiples of this card. For 2 colourless energy, Quick Attack does 10 damage, or 30 on a heads flip. And for 2 lightning and 1 colourless energy, Pin Missile has you flip 4 coins, doing 20 damage for each heads. Right, I'm not going to go over the Evolutions deck again, it just doesn't really work. Instead, let's see if Pojo's claim that Jolteon works really well in Lightning decks stands up. The problem here is that Lightning decks just aren't really a thing in modern Base Fossil. The only one that really exists is Buzzapdos, but there's just no room for a Jolteon in this turbo turn 2 Buzzap Blitzkrieg build. Besides, Buzzapdos is just a worse Arcanine deck, taking fewer Okos and no Psyduck to lock your opponent's trainers. Anyway, you wouldn't build an all-lightning deck because Hitmonchan would just destroy it. To counter this, you could run Jolteon alongside Dodrio or Scyther in an all-lightning energy deck, but that raises the question, why not just run Electabuzz? Electabuzz is far easier to power up, doesn't need to evolve, can paralyse, can guarantee Okos on Dodrios with a plus power. At a cost of 3 energy, Pin Missile is too vulnerable to energy removals, and its lack of synergy with double colourless energy doesn't help the card either. And if you're not running lightning energy, but Jolteon's colourless quick attack appealed as a Dodrio/water counter, then Promo Electabuzz already has you covered. Sorry, Jolteon. Pojo gave Jolteon a 3.5 out of 5. Like Flareon, there are simply better options than Jolteon in its typing. Specifically, the 2 Electabuzzes. Leave your Thunderstones at home, because Jolteon, like Flareon, gets a 2.5. Next up, a Safari Zone stalwart, it's Kangaskhan. Kangaskhan is a basic colourless type Pokemon with 90 HP. Pojo gave Kangaskhan a 3.5 out of 5 with the strat, did someone say Genghis Khan? Kangaskhan is a great staller, giving you time to fill your hand. For 1 colourless energy, Fetch lets you draw a card. And for 4 colourless energy, Comet Punch has you flip 4 coins and does 20 damage for each heads. Kangaskhan, like Chansey or Lickitung, is one of those big, bulky, basic colourless Pokemon that you can just stick in front of your opponent and buy some time with. But aside from just sitting there soaking up hits, Kangaskhan allows you to actively speed up the drawing process with Fetch, ensuring you have card advantage over your opponent and, basically, allowing you to get set up quicker. Whilst Kangaskhan sits there soaking up damage and fetching you cards, you can be benching basics, evolving them, attaching your energies, whatever your deck needs to do. Now, some decks don't need this setting up time. Haymaker decks want to pressure your opponent from the word go with damaging attacks. Arcanine and Rain Dance have very specific setups that they want to achieve by turn 2, and thus don't need Kangaskhan getting in the way. And Lickitung stall decks certainly don't want to be drawing extra cards. So what decks does Kangaskhan work best in? Traditionally, it's your mid-tempo evolution decks like Dragonite or Venusaur. Both of these decks have various component parts that they need to assemble before they get working, but they can't start blitzing turn 2 like the turbo decks, so a methodical approach is required. Using Fetch, you can find your necessary evolutions, your Dragonairs, Dodrios, and start to stockpile your grass energies. Then, once you're all ready to go, you can start laying the smackdown. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to talk about Kangaskhan in Venusaur decks just for a second, and I'm going to explain why I don't think that Kangaskhan is the best fit in Venusaur decks anymore. I know there are some top Base Fossil clerics out there that will disagree with me, but yeah, I used to use Kangaskhan in the Venusaur decks, but one day I made the switch to Lickitung and Scyther instead, and I suddenly found myself winning a lot more. I found that sitting behind a tongue-wrapping Lickitung was a much safer strategy whilst I got set up. Not only was Lickitung doing chip damage every turn, but whenever Tongue Wrap paralysed, it meant that I had another turn safe from pressure to gradually build up my board state. The Kangaskhan strategy is sort of the opposite of this. You draw more cards than your opponent, but at the expense of your Kangaskhan getting attacked and likely being knocked out by turn 4. The problem there is if you haven't got fully set up by turn 4, and if you haven't managed to attach enough energies by turn 4, then you're in big trouble. With Lickitung, although giving you less card advantage over your opponent, it is likely to give you more turns within which to do things, because you're often paralysing your opponent with Tongue Wrap. So you have more actual turns to attach energies or to evolve your Pokemon, all the while pressuring your opponent with damage and paralysis. So ultimately, it's a difference in setup tempo. Kangaskhan is a quicker setup, but Lickitung gives you more turns to do things, if that makes sense. If you're getting bombarded with energy removals, then you want more turns to reattach them. And if you're playing the sort of OG Venusaur build, where you're only attacking with Venusaur, Kangaskhan, Chansey or Dodrio, these are all Pokemon that require 3 to 4 energy cards to attack. If you're getting energy removal early game, then you're just not going to have enough energy amassed on your board to do anything. Whereas Lickitung can attack for 1 energy, you can always attack with Lickitung. What this leads to is, with the Lickitung sort of Scyther build of Venusaur, you end up playing the first half of the game much like a sort of classic grass stall deck, where you're just tongue wrapping, soaking up pressure, whilst gradually amassing grass energy. And then late game you can use, say, Chansey, Venusaur, Scyther, Pinsir, Ditto, whatever you've got in your deck to attack for big damage, once you've managed to withstand the early barrage of energy removals. And I think Lickitung allows you to withstand the opposing pressure more so than Kangaskhan does. Kangaskhan's about a speedy setup, but I don't necessarily think that's best in Venusaur decks that require you having had stockpiled a lot of energy first. Anyway, that's my Venusaur Kangaskhan soapbox over. Let's talk about other Kangaskhan uses. Dragonite decks. I think Kangaskhan does work in Dragonite decks as your setup fetcher, because you tend to be attacking with Hitmonchan in your Dragonite decks. Hitmonchan only requires 1 fighting energy, so you're less vulnerable to energy removals. You can sort of get your early setup with fetch, then just start swinging with Hitmonchan. What I will say, however, is that Kangaskhan's fetch is incredibly useful in the Prop 15 format, where, since you only have 15 trainers in your deck, your draw power is severely hampered, and thus starting with a Kangaskhan to draw through your deck with fetch is mega useful, although Kangaskhan is an easy strand target for the Slowpoke recursion decks. Anyway, back to base fossil. Kangaskhan also has Comet Punch. It might look expensive, but a couple of DCEs will power this attack up in no time. The question is it worth committing 2 DCEs or 4 other energies to? Yeah, it depends on how lucky you're feeling. The brutal truth is that a 4 energy attack that averages 40 damage isn't very good. You might get lucky and hit all heads, but nothing hurts more than an all-tails Comet Punch. Going back to the Venusaur decks, again, I really think that putting all your energy eggs in Kangaskhan's pouch basket is a mistake. All that setup to only flip 4 tails is soul-crushing. If you're going to commit to a 4 energy attacker in Venusaur, then swinging with Chansey or Pinsir or even Venusaur, if you want that guaranteed big damage. I think the only deck that can justify using Comet Punch Kangaskhan as its main attacker is Alakazam decks. Because you can just swap the damage off of Kangaskhan every turn, it doesn't matter so much if Kangaskhan whiffs its punches or gets energy removaled, since you can easily keep Kangaskhan damage free. Alakazam is actually another deck that I think does benefit from Kangaskhan's early game fetching, since you want to get Alakazam on the board as quickly as possible. The other decks that I've seen centred around Comet Punch are some very rogue Buzzap builds. A DCE and an Electrode on turn 2, followed by a Lass, and you've got a powered up Kangaskhan ready to, well, flip coins. Yeah, not quite as threatening as Arcanine, but hey, with some lucky coin flips, you might be in for a win. Pojo gave Kangaskhan a 3.5. If it sounds like I've been harsh on Kangaskhan, I don't mean to be. 90 HP, psychic resistance, all colourless attacks, fetch for 1 energy, these are all great. But I don't buy Comet Punch as an attack whatsoever. It's like Big Explosion, but without the fun of getting to attach a dozen energies and just go wild. I think in Venusaur decks you're much better using your precious grass energies on more reliable attackers. And maybe it's just personal taste, but I've always found using Licky Tongue to set up has yielded far better results. But in Alakazam decks and Dragonite decks, Kangaskhan's fetch is certainly useful, and Comet Punch, despite being unreliable, will scare your opponent into doing something about it. So, to conclude finally, I do believe that Kangaskhan is a competitive card, but compared with the other big colourless basics, I just think Licky Tongue provides better setup tempo, and Chansey provides better big damage. Kangaskhan, you still get a perfectly playable 3 out of 5. Next up is Mr. Mime. Mr. Mime is a basic psychic Pokemon with 40 HP. Pojo gave Mr. Mime a near perfect 4.5 out of 5 with the strat: an absolute knockout clean-up hitter, bring him off the bench until your opponent has a more powerful but damaged Pokemon with no move below 30. Mr. Mime has the Pokemon power Invisible Wall, where any attacking move that deals 30 or more damage to Mr. Mime instead deals absolutely nothing. And for 1 psychic and 1 colourless energy, Meditate does 10 damage plus 10 more damage for each damage counter on the defending Pokemon. Invisible Wall is perhaps the best Pokemon power in the entire format. It's a power so strong that it warps the entire meta. If your deck doesn't run a Pokemon that can damage Mr. Mime, then you're risking an auto loss if this little guy pops up. Think again before you run that Scyther, Chansey and Mewtwo deck, people. Basically, Mr. Mime's existence forces every deck to include direct counters to it. The classic example of this is Rain Dance, a deck that, before the jungle format, was all about evolving up into big damage attackers as quickly as possible. Problem is, if Rain Dance evolves all its basics and is then confronted with Mr. Mime, it literally can't do anything but lose. Once the Fossil expansion was released, Lapras became a requirement in Rain Dance decks, since it could attack Mr. Mime for 10 or 20 damage. And you find this in other heavy-hitting evolution decks. Venusaur decks should always leave a Bulbasaur or Ivysaur unevolved, just in case, or taking a Pinsir. And Arcanine decks are forced to include Fossil Ghastly, all to deal with Mr. Mime. The only downside to Invisible Wall is that early game it isn't particularly effective. Sure, it can stop a Charizard, but it can't stop Caterpie. Or, to use more meta-relevant examples, starting Mr. Mime against Hitmonchan is a real possibility, but it will see Mr. Mime KO'd by turn 2. Fossil Magmar is also a tricky customer, thanks to the Smokescreen Smog combo, threatening a 2-turn KO, as well as Jigglypuff being able to threaten 2 pounds whilst resisting Mr. Mime. Fossil Ghastly is Mr. Mime's biggest starting nightmare, however, since for 1 energy it can hit Mr. Mime for weakness and threaten paralysis. Other more niche counters to Mr. Mime are Venomoth, which can use Shift to hit Mr. Mime for weakness whilst threatening poison and confusion, and Coughing, which is guaranteed to either confuse or poison Mr. Mime. However, neither of these cards can attack for 1 energy. But Rattata can. Single energy 20 damage attack and a psychic resistance. Take that, Mime Boy. And then there's the mighty Nidoking, the only card in the entire format that can OHKO a Mr. Mime through Invisible Wall, with Toxic dealing 20 plus double poison damage. But good luck evolving into Nidoking when neither of its psychic weak pre-evolved forms can hurt Mr. Mime. Anyway, my point is that every deck needs a Mr. Mime counter. Invisible Wall's ability to, well, wall certain Pokemon has always made Mr. Mime a prime candidate in Stool decks. From the earliest days of Stool in Alakazam builds, Mr. Mime could be impossible to ever knock out. Since you can't KO it in 1 hit, well, unless you're running Nidoking, Any damage counters you place on Mr. Mime just get moved off next turn by Alakazam, making Mr. Mime nigh on indestructible. And in the modern Lickitung decks, Mr. Mime exists to wall all the heavy-hitting cards we've already mentioned. But of course, Mr. Mime can serve an offensive purpose too. Mr. Mime's Meditate attack is perfect for KOing already damaged opponents. Lickitung decks are able to place chip damage onto their opponents turn after turn with Tongue Wrap before finishing them off with Meditate. Meditate's only downside is that it requires 2 energy to use, another reason why Mr. Mime isn't a great Pokemon to start a game with. And it isn't just your psychic decks like Lickitung and Alakazam that you find Mr. Mime as an attacking Pokemon in. You'll often find Mr. Mime paired with fighting types like Hitmonchan. This is because those big normal types that resist Psychic are weak to fighting. Therefore you end up with decks like Hitmonchan, Dodrio, and then a toolbox of all the best Psychic types, which include Ghastly, Promo Mewtwo, and always Mr. Mime. In fact, if you're ever going to splash a bunch of Psychic types into a deck as a way to counter Hitmonchans or even other Psychic types, then Mr. Mime is basically a mandatory inclusion just because it can wall so many of those big damage attackers. Pojo gave Mr. Mime a 4.5. Mr. Mime is a meta-warping card that requires all decks to have an answer to it. Just look at these Pojo.com forum posts from 1999, just after Mr. Mime's release. Nothing short of mass hysteria. Unfortunately, there are a lot of popular cards that can deal with Mr. Mime, and early game Mr. Mime is particularly vulnerable, and it doesn't have that single energy attack. But, on the other hand, if you slap down a surprise Mr. Mime late game and your opponent doesn't have an answer to it, then you've just won. One of the most annoying cards in the entire format, but also one of the best, Mr. Mime is an auto-include in any deck running Psychic Energy, and for that reason, I'm giving Mr. Mime a 4 out of 5. Moving on to Nidoqueen. Nidoqueen is a Stage 2 Grass-type Pokemon with 90 HP. Pojo gave Nidoqueen a 2.5 out of 5 with the strat, Boyfriends requires having Nidoqueen around. I think that should say requires having Nidoking around. Anyway, not always smart. Mega Punch is expensive and retreat cost is high. Great potential for inflicting damage on you. I'll be honest, all of that is a bit of a confusing strategy. Let's see if we can decipher it all. For 1 grass and 1 colourless energy, Boyfriends does 20 damage plus an extra 20 damage for each Nidoking you have on your bench. And for 2 grass and 2 colourless energy, Mega Punch does 50 damage. So, Mega Punch is an okay attack. Does some nice damage, but you are going to struggle to power this attack up, and certainly struggle to keep your energy cards on Nidoqueen. Then there's Boyfriends, a low cost and very intriguing attack indeed. Only costing 2 energies is something quite rare for a Stage 2 card, but it's an attack that in theory can inflict some big damage. If you have 4 Nidokings on your bench, then you'd be dishing out 100 damage for only 2 energy. Pretty crazy, right? The problem here is, how likely is it that you're going to be able to fill your bench with Nidokings? The answer is very unlikely. Setting up 1 Stage 2 is tough. Setting up 2 Stage 2s is so tough that basically any deck that requires 2 different Stage 2s having to be set up is basically unviable. The best of these decks is probably Dragonite Vileplume, which, although great when it works, is a massive chore to get set up. So, setting up multiple Stage 2s just isn't gonna happen. There isn't enough time in a game to find all the component pieces in the right order to set Boyfriends up. You're spending so much time and resources just finding your Nidokings that it's tough to actually pressure your opponent. The deck space required to facilitate Boyfriends means that you'll end up sacrificing useful trainer cards for multiple copies of Pokemon Breeder and all your different Nidokings. There's just no consistent way to get all these Pokemon evolved quickly, and then you often lack the resources to disrupt your opponent, often giving them a massive advantage. In later formats like Prop 15, where your deck will naturally be full of Pokemon because you can only run 15 trainer cards, Boyfriends decks are slightly more viable. You can even use Brock's Ninetales to shapeshift into more Nidokings, making sure you've always got a variety of ways to get Nidoqueen's polyamorous situationship set up. But we're not talking about Prop 15, we're talking about Base Fossil. And the pace in Base Fossil is just too fast and the gameplay too aggressive and disruptive for you to reliably get all these boyfriends in the right place at the right time. You're better off just swinging in with Mega Punch. But if you're going to do that, you're better off just playing a more powerful Stage 2 deck. In defence of Nidoqueen, it does have a pretty good evolution line. Female Nidoran has a very solid 60 HP and a decent single energy attack in Fury Swipes, and it can even call for family to help you get boyfriends set up. Nidorina is, as well, not bad. Supersonic for a single energy and a potentially dangerous double kick. But at the end of the day, is filling your deck full of all these Nidomons going to lead you to victory with Nidoqueen? Pojo gave Nidoqueen a 2.5. Stage 2 decks are, by their nature, harder to pilot than any other decks in the Base Fossil format because they tend to be slower to set up and require far more resources to do so. So you're always at a disadvantage, meaning that your Stage 2 creature better be worth the effort once you've got it going. Blastoise, Venusaur, Alakazam, these are all cards with incredibly useful Pokemon powers that turn the tide of a game in your favour. Nidoqueen offers you an okay but expensive Mega Punch and a boyfriend's attack that, although really fun, is just unlikely to ever be dealing more than 40 damage, which for a Stage 2 card doesn't cut the mustard. Sorry Nidoqueen, but I just can't see you as a truly competitive card. You're going to stay at a 2.5. And finally, for part 1 of the Jungle Holo Rares, we have Pidgeot. Pidgeot is a Stage 2 colourless Pokemon with 80 HP, free retreat and a fighting resistance. Pojo gave Pidgeot a 2.5 out of 5 with the strat: Hurricane can win you the game if your opponent has only one Pokemon in play. For 2 colourless energy, Wing Attack does 20 damage, and for 3 colourless energy, Hurricane does 30 damage and, unless this attack knocks the defending Pokemon out, it returns the defending Pokemon and all cards attached to it back to your opponent's hand. Now, at the time of this video being made, there has been a mini resurgence of Pidgeot decks popping up on TCG1 due to Hurricane being such an interesting attack. As Pojo mentioned, if your opponent has only one Pokemon in play and they get Hurricaned, then that's an instant win. But this situation is pretty unlikely. By the time you've evolved up into Pidgeot, your opponent will likely have other basics in play, and as soon as they see a Pidgey, they'll be benching cards just to avoid a donking. So, what use could Hurricane realistically be? The first thing that springs to mind is disrupting evolution cards, particularly Stage 2s. If you Hurricane a Venusaur, then your opponent has to waste turns re-evolving their Bulbasaur just so they can start using Energy Trans again. Plus, any energy cards that were attached now have to be reattached. Pretty annoying. Even more annoying is if you've evolved up using Pokemon Breeder, most commonly in Rain Dance decks. If a breeded Blastoise gets Hurricaned, then not only can your opponent not use Rain Dance next turn, which is a massive hindrance for any Rain Dance deck, but they need to find another breeder or a Wartortle in order to get Blastoise up and running again. Now the problem here is, many Rain Dance decks that are focused on getting Blastoise set up as quickly as possible tend to not play Wartortle, or maybe they only play one. Now if your opponent can't find that Wartortle or just isn't playing it, then they're going to have to rely on using Pokemon Breeder. In theory, if you Hurricane over and over again until they've wasted all their Pokemon Breeders, then your opponent's pretty screwed, with potentially no way of getting back into their Blastoise. The problem with this Hurricane strategy is that it doesn't really lend itself to actually taking prizes. Both of Pidgeot's attacks are fairly low damage, especially for a Stage 2 card, so how does annoying your opponent with Hurricane actually win you the game? Well, most of the Pidgeot decks that I've seen have adopted a stall deck template, including cards like Lickitungs, Ghastlies, Scythers, all the energy removals, with the objective of disrupting your opponent so long that they end up decking out. And look, this is all fine. I've played against Pidgeot decks and I've certainly found them irritating, but I don't think they're actually good. The problem is that Hurricane has practically no effect on the most popular cards in the format, which are the big basic Pokemon that only require one energy to attack. Cards like Lickitung, Magmar, Electabuzz, etc. Secondly, if your goal is to disrupt evolution decks, then there are already other, better ways of doing this. One is to play Aerodactyl and stop them evolving altogether. Another is to play Mr. Mime, a card that almost all Stage 2 evolutions can't damage due to Invisible Wall. In general, Mr. Mime is considered the best counter in the format to Blastoise and Rain Dance decks. Unlike Pidgeot, it's a basic Pokemon, and unlike Pidgeot, it doesn't require any energy cards on it to do its disrupting. And if you really want to punish those Pokemon breeder decks, then you can pair Mr. Mime with another strong Psychic basic Pokemon, that being Promo Mew. Promo Mew has the Devolution Beam attack, which allows you to choose the top evolution card on any of your opponent's Pokemon and return it to their hand. Thus, a Blastoise with 40 damage on it that then gets Devolution Beamed will knock out the Squirtle. So, when all these other cards like Aerodactyl, Mr. Mime, Promo Mew exist, is there really a need to be evolving Pidgeot up through its terrible pre-evolved forms, all the while sacrificing valuable deck space to fit in a Stage 2 evolution line, really worth the hassle? Is it all just a bit gimmicky? Pojo gave Pidgeot a 2.5. As mentioned earlier, there does seem to be a lot of renewed interest in Pidgeot and trying to make its Hurricane attack work in the current meta. But when the meta is dominated by low energy basics, perhaps Hurricane just doesn't have enough utility to make Pidgeot viable. And when it comes to stall decks, the Licky Tongue Big Basics variants just aren't improved when you have to include cards like Pidgey in them. A very interesting Pokemon that may still have some unlocked competitive potential, but for the time being, Hurricane is too situational to be worth Pidgeot's awful evolution line. This Stage 2 is staying at 2.5. And that's it for part 1 of the Jungle Holo Rares. For those of you keeping track at home, these are the scores originally given by Pojo back in 1999. And these are my updated scores for the 2025 Base Fossil metagame. Of course, these are purely my opinions, so if you disagree, let me know down in the comments. The Kangaskhan score might be quite low for some people, and the Clefable score might be quite high for some people. However, I will be releasing a video of me playing on TCG1 with various Clefable builds, just to sort of show you why I came to this mad conclusion perhaps. Ogre Hands, if you're watching, I promise this won't be gimmick infringement. My videos won't be as good as yours. Next time we're going to be looking at the rest of all the Jungle Holos, so stay tuned for that one. In the meantime, please like, share and subscribe. Thanks again for watching. Old Rod, out.